Christmas Eve 2024. I sat at our dining room table surrounded by family when my father looked directly at me and said the words that shattered everything. Matthew, you're a burden. You can't live with us anymore. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow falling outside our Denver home. My mother stared at her plate. My sister Emma avoided my eyes. The turkey grew cold as I realized this wasn't just dinner conversation. This was an ambush planned by the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I set down my fork and studied my father's weathered face, searching for any sign this was some twisted joke. Gary's steel gray eyes held no warmth, no humor, just cold certainty. Excuse me? I managed to say my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. You heard me, son? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his flannel shirt. You're 28 years old. Time to stand on your own 2 feet instead of living off your parents. Living off my parents. The irony hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I glanced around the dining room, the same room where I'd sat 3 years ago, calculator in hand, showing them how I could save their house from foreclosure. The same table where I'd laid out financial spreadsheets proving I could cover their monthly expenses while they got back on their feet. Dad, are you serious right now? Emma finally spoke, her voice cracking. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Matthew pays for literally everything. Emma, stay out of this. Mom snapped her first words since Grace. Janet's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. This is between your father and brother. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and started reading aloud. December 1st mortgage payment to First National Bank, $2,100. December 1st Xcel, Energy, $347. December 1st, Comcast, $199. December 5th, King Soopers grocery bill, $412. I looked up. Should I continue? Gary's jaw tightened. That doesn't give you the right to... December 10th. I interrupted, scrolling further. Emma's tuition payment to Colorado State, $850. December 15th. Dad's physical therapy copay, $75. December 20th. Mom's prescription pickup, $123. The room fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and distant Christmas music from the neighbor's house. I did quick math in my head, $4,200 in December alone. Every single month for 3 years. Matthew, honey? Mom started, her voice taking on that placating tone she used when she wanted something. Your father's just saying maybe it's time you found your own place, started your own life. My own life. I laughed, but nothing about it felt funny. You mean the life I put on hold when Dad hurt his back? When you were 2 months behind on the mortgage and facing foreclosure? I remembered that conversation like it happened yesterday. Gary had called me at my apartment in Boulder, voice broken with shame and desperation. The construction company had let him go after his injury. Workers' compensation barely covered groceries. They needed help just temporarily, just until he recovered and found new work. I gave up my apartment. I continued, my voice growing stronger. I gave up my privacy, my independence, my relationship with Kelly because she couldn't handle me moving back home. I delayed buying a car, delayed saving for my future, delayed everything so you could keep this house. We never asked you to sacrifice your relationship, Dad muttered. No, but you asked me to sacrifice everything else. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked our snow-covered driveway. Do you know what my colleagues think when they come to company parties and I tell them I live with my parents? Do you know what Sarah thinks when she can't stay over because you make comments about inappropriate behavior under your roof? Sarah. My girlfriend of 8 months who'd been nothing but understanding about my living situation, even when Dad criticized her career as a marketing director or complained about her parking in his driveway spot. I've contributed over $150,000 to this household in 3 years, I said, turning back to face them. Not counting groceries, utilities I pay for your comfort, or the vacation to Branson I funded last summer because you needed to get away. Emma's face had gone pale. Matthew, I had no idea it was that much. Why would you? Nobody talks about money in this house except when they need me to pay for something. I walked back to the table, my hands surprisingly steady as I picked up my phone again. You want me to leave? Fine. I'll start right now. I opened my banking app and navigated to automatic payments. Wells Fargo mortgage payment December 31st canceled. I held up my phone so they could see the screen. Xcel Energy autopay canceled. Comcast canceled. Matthew, what are you doing? Mom's voice climbed an octave. Exactly what Dad asked for. I'm stopping being a burden. I continued tapping through menus. Emma's spring tuition payment scheduled for January 5th canceled. Dad's physical therapy appointments canceled. Mom's gym membership canceled. You can't do this. Gary slammed his hand on the table, making the dinner plates jump. This is my house. Is it? I pulled up the mortgage statement on my phone. Because I'm the one whose bank account has been keeping it from going into foreclosure. I'm the one whose credit score co-signed the refinancing when you couldn't qualify a loan. The confirmation emails started arriving immediately. Each one felt like cutting a rope that had been strangling me for 3 years. Wells Fargo autopay canceled. Xcel Energy autopay canceled. Colorado State University payment canceled. Emma started crying. My dorm deposit, my meal plan, everything's due next week. Then maybe you should ask the people who think I'm such a burden to figure it out, I said, forwarding each cancellation email to Gary's inbox. There. Now you can really see what it's like to stand on your own 2 feet. Dad's face had gone from red to ashen white as the reality hit him. Without my $4,000 monthly, their household income was $2,800. Their monthly expenses were $4,700. The math was simple and devastating. The aftermath of my digital financial assault unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Emma's sobs echoed through the dining room as she stared at her phone, probably calculating how she'd explain to her roommates why she couldn't return to Colorado State next semester. Matthew, please. Mom stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You're being dramatic. Can't we discuss this like adults? Adults? I pocketed my phone and looked at each of them. Adults don't ambush someone at Christmas dinner. Adults don't call their primary income source a burden. Gary's face had shifted from angry red to sickly gray. He was doing the same math I'd done countless times over 3 years, the math that showed their complete dependency on my software engineering salary. Son, maybe I spoke too harshly, he said, his voice losing its earlier certainty. The holidays got me stressed and… Stop! I held up my hand. Just stop pretending this was some spontaneous outburst. You've been building up to this conversation for weeks. I can tell because you've been extra critical lately. Complaining about my work schedule, my friends visiting Sarah, staying for dinner. You've been laying groundwork. Emma wiped her eyes with her napkin, leaving black mascara streaks. Dad, is that true? Did you plan this? I was trying to help your brother grow up, Gary said, but his conviction was crumbling. 28 years old, living in his childhood bedroom, bringing strange women around. Strange women? I couldn't help laughing. Sarah has a master's degree in business administration and makes $70,000 a year managing marketing campaigns for a tech startup. She's hardly strange. She's successful, kind, and somehow still willing to date someone who lives with his parents. The truth was, Sarah had been more understanding about my living situation than anyone had a right to be. She knew about Dad's injury, knew about the financial crisis that brought me home. She'd even suggested I was being too generous, that my parents needed to take more responsibility for their own recovery. How much do we actually make without Matthew's money? Emma asked quietly. Mom sat back down heavily. Your father gets $1,200 a month in disability. I make $1,600 part-time at Safeway. $2,800 total, I said. Your mortgage alone is $2,100. Add utilities, insurance, food, gas, your medications. Dad's therapy, you're short about $2,000 every month. We'll figure something out, Gary said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm getting better. The physical therapy is working. I'll go back to work soon. Oh. I'd heard this promise for 3 years. Dad's back injury was real, a herniated disc from lifting concrete blocks incorrectly on a job site. But his recovery had plateaued over a year ago, and he seemed comfortable collecting disability while I subsidized their lifestyle. Dad, you've been getting better since 2021. Your doctor cleared you for light-duty work 8 months ago, but you said construction was too risky. Remember, you were worried about re-injury. Because it is risky. His defensive tone told me everything I needed to know. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where Mom kept important papers. My hands found what I was looking for, my own financial tracking spreadsheet printed and highlighted in neat columns. I'd been documenting every expense for tax purposes, but now it served as evidence of my family's financial reality. Let me read you some numbers, I said, returning to the dining room. 2022, I contributed $49,000 to household expenses. 2023, $51,000. 2024 through November, $47,000. That's $147,000, not counting Christmas gifts, Emma's car insurance, or the emergency room visit when Dad thought he was having a heart attack, but it was acid reflux. Emma's mouth fell open. Matthew, that's more than most people make in 2 years. It's more than your parents make in 4 years, I corrected. And instead of gratitude, I get called a burden and told to move out on Christmas Eve. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How's dinner going? Still planning to tell them about the promotion opportunity. The promotion. In all the chaos, I'd forgotten about the email I'd received that morning from Jake Morrison, my project manager at Innovate Software Solutions. Senior architect position, $20,000 salary increase, leadership role on the new client acquisition team. The position was in Seattle. I'd been planning to tell my family about the opportunity tonight to discuss how it might affect our living arrangements. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd just solved my decision-making problem by making the choice obvious. There's something else you should know, I said, looking at Gary specifically. I've been offered a promotion at work, senior software architect. It comes with a significant salary increase. Hope flickered in Mom's eyes. Oh, honey, that's wonderful news. More money would certainly help. The position is in Seattle, I continued. I'd need to relocate by the 1st of February. The hope died instantly. Emma started crying again, quietly this time. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Gary just stared at me like I'd announced I was joining the circus. You can't move to Seattle, Mom whispered. Your whole life is here. Your family is here. My family just told me I'm a burden and need to leave. I folded the financial spreadsheet and put it back in the drawer. Seattle starts to sound pretty appealing when you put it that way. Matthew, come on, Emma said through her tears. Dad didn't mean it like that. Tell him you didn't mean it, Dad. Gary's pride warred visibly with his panic. He opened his mouth several times without speaking, like a fish gasping on dry land. I meant you need more independence, he finally said. But not moving across the country, not abandoning your family. Abandoning? The word hit me wrong. I've been supporting this family for 3 years. I've sacrificed my own financial goals, my own timeline for buying a house, my own independence. How exactly have I abandoned anyone? You know what I mean? Gary said weakly. But I didn't know what he meant. And suddenly I realized I was tired of trying to interpret his mixed messages, tired of walking on eggshells around his pride while he spent my money. I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages with Sarah. Actually, let me call Sarah. Maybe she has some insight into whether I'm being unreasonable. Don't you dare air our family business to some girl you've known for 8 months. Gary said, his temper flaring again. Some girl? I hit Sarah's contact and put the phone on speaker. You mean the woman I love? The woman who's been nothing but respectful to this family, even when you criticized her job, her car, and her choice to eat vegetarian. The phone rang twice before Sarah's warm voice filled the room. Hey babe, how's Christmas dinner going? Interesting question, I said, watching my family's expressions. Dad just told me I'm a burden who needs to move out. What do you think about that? There was a long pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. Matthew, are you on speaker? Yes, my whole family is here. Another pause. Well, I think your father's timing is terrible, but maybe he's not entirely wrong. The words hit me like a slap. My own girlfriend agreeing with my father's assessment. You think I'm a burden too? I asked. No, baby, I think you're being burdened. There's a difference. Sarah's voice grew stronger. I think you've been carrying a load that isn't yours to carry, and maybe it's time for everyone to learn how to support themselves. I could see Mom's face reddening, could practically feel Gary's anger radiating across the table. What's that supposed to mean? Gary asked, speaking directly to the phone. It means, Mr. Thompson, that Matthew has been enabling your family's financial dependence for 3 years. And maybe, just maybe, he'd be happier and healthier if he focused on building his own life instead of subsidizing yours. The room erupted. How dare you? Mom hissed at the phone, her face flushing scarlet. You have no right to judge our family situation, young lady. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Thompson. Sarah's voice remained steady through the speaker. I don't have the right to judge, but I do have the right to care about Matthew's well-being, and I've watched him sacrifice his own happiness for 3 years. What exactly has he told you about our situation? Gary's voice carried a dangerous edge. He's told me about your back injury, about the financial crisis that brought him home, about his commitment to helping until you recovered. Sarah paused. What he hasn't told me is why you're still collecting disability when you've been doing construction work for neighbors. The words hit the dining room like a bomb blast. Emma's mouth fell open. Mom's water glass slipped from her hand, shattering against her dinner plate. Gary's face went completely white. That's not how could you possibly, Gary stammered. Instagram is public, Mr. Thompson, Sarah said quietly. Your profile shows you rebuilding Tom Henderson's deck last month, installing kitchen cabinets for the Wilsons in September, and doing roofing work for at least 3 other families this fall. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad, what is she talking about? It's not what you think, Gary said quickly, his eyes darting between me and the phone. Those were just small favors for friends helping out neighbors. Paid favors, Sarah interrupted. I can see the Venmo payments Tom Henderson sent you. $2,000 for deck reconstruction. The Wilsons paid you $1,500 for kitchen work. Should I keep going? My legs suddenly felt weak. I sank into my chair, staring at my father as the pieces fell into place. The new tools in his garage that he claimed were gifts. The cash I'd seen him counting that he said came from selling old equipment. The days he claimed to be at physical therapy but came home with sawdust on his clothes. Matthew, I can explain, Gary started. You've been working construction while collecting disability fraud. My voice came out as a whisper. It's not fraud. Gary's defensiveness exploded. I'm still injured. I still have bad days. Those jobs were just light work, just helping friends. Paid work, I said, standing up so fast my chair tipped backward. Under the table, unreported cash-in-hand construction work while telling Social Security you're too disabled to work. Emma looked like she was going to be sick. Dad, that's illegal. That's really, really illegal. How much? I demanded. How much have you been making on these side jobs? Gary's mouth opened and closed without sound. Mom had gone completely pale, her eyes fixed on the broken glass scattered around her plate. I can help with that math, Sarah said through the phone, her voice gentle but relentless. Based on the Venmo transactions visible on Tom Henderson's public profile and cross-referencing with your Instagram posts, I'd estimate you've earned approximately $15,000 to $20,000 in unreported income over the past 8 months. $20,000. While I'd been contributing $4,000 a month to keep our household afloat. While I'd been feeling guilty about considering the Seattle position because it would leave my disabled father financially stranded. Matthew, honey, let me explain. Mom finally spoke, her voice shaking. Your father was scared. He was worried that if he reported getting better, they'd cut off his disability payments. And what if he got hurt again? What if he couldn't find steady work? So instead of taking that risk like an adult, he decided to commit federal fraud while letting his son subsidize his lifestyle. Sarah's voice carried controlled anger now. And then, when Matthew's generosity became inconvenient, you decided to kick him out on Christmas. We never said kick him out, Gary protested weakly. You told him he was a burden who couldn't live here anymore. Emma said, her voice hollow. On Christmas, after he's been keeping us from losing our house for 3 years. I picked up my chair and sat down hard, my mind reeling. Federal disability fraud carried serious penalties, fines, prison time, and full restitution of fraudulently collected benefits. If Gary had been collecting $1,200 monthly for 8 months while working, he owed Social Security nearly $10,000 plus penalties. There's more, Sarah said quietly. More, I could barely get the word out. Matthew, your father called me 2 weeks ago. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of Emma's sharp intake of breath. He called to tell me I should find someone better than his loser son, because you would never amount to anything, and were dragging me down with your lack of ambition. The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at Gary, who couldn't meet my eyes. He said a smart woman like me deserved someone who could support a family properly, and that staying with you was a mistake that would cost me my future. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Dad, you didn't. I was trying to protect her, Gary said desperately. Matthew's been stuck in this house for 3 years. He's not building a career, not moving forward. Because he's been supporting you, Emma shouted. He's been paying for your life while you lied about being disabled. Sarah, I managed to say, my throat tight. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew it would hurt you, and I could handle one confused father's opinion of our relationship. But this, she paused. This dinner, this ambush telling you you're a burden right before Christmas, this wasn't spontaneous, Matthew. This was planned. Planned. I looked around the table at my family. Your father wanted you gone before the new year. He's been building up to this conversation for weeks, criticizing everything about you to create justification. The goal was to make you feel unwelcome enough to leave voluntarily. Mom's tears started flowing silently. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Why? I asked, though part of me already knew. Because, Sarah said gently, taking your money while respecting you as an adult was getting harder to justify. It was easier to vilify you than to feel grateful. Easier to call you a burden than admit they'd become completely dependent on your generosity. Gary's shoulders slumped in defeat. Sarah, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Mr. Thompson. You wanted your son's financial support without his presence. You wanted to feel like the head of your household while he paid for the privilege of being disrespected in his childhood bedroom. The truth of her words settled over the dining room like a heavy blanket. I looked at each family member, seeing them clearly for the first time in 3 years. Is that true, Dad? I asked quietly. Did you want me gone so you could keep my money without dealing with me? Gary's silence was answer enough. I sat in stunned silence, processing the depth of my family's betrayal. Not just the financial deception, but the calculated emotional manipulation designed to drive me away while preserving their access to my income. Matthew M. Gary finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I know how this looks. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Dad, I need you to say that again. About the disability fraud. About the cash work you've been doing. I'm not saying anything else without what a lawyer, I hit record. You've been collecting federal disability benefits while doing paid construction work. You've defrauded the Social Security Administration of approximately $10,000 over 8 months. You want a lawyer up for that? Emma grabbed Gary's arm. Dad, stop talking. Please just stop talking. But the dam had burst. Gary's guilt and desperation took over. It wasn't supposed to be fraud. He said, his words spilling out faster than his brain could filter them. I was getting better, but slowly. The work was just small jobs, just helping neighbors. I was still hurt, still having bad days. While collecting benefits that explicitly require you to report any income, I said, my finger still on the record button. While living in a house your disabled son pays for because you can't work. I was scared. Gary's voice cracked. Scared that if I reported the income, they'd cut off my benefits. Scared that if I got hurt again, we'd have nothing. You don't understand what it's like to feel useless in your own home. Useless enough to commit federal crimes, apparently. I stopped recording and showed him the file. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of confession to disability fraud. Mom had gone completely pale. Matthew, you can't be serious. You wouldn't turn in your own father. Why not? I looked at her directly. He was perfectly willing to kick out his own son. Sarah's right, you wanted me gone but needed my money. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for. I opened my laptop, which I'd left on the kitchen counter while helping with dinner preparations. The Social Security Administration fraud reporting website loaded quickly on our high-speed internet I paid for. I'm going to read this aloud as I type it, I said, positioning the laptop so everyone could see the screen. To whom it may concern, I am reporting suspected disability fraud by Gary Thompson's Social Security number. Matthew, stop! Emma lunged toward my laptop, but I closed it before she could reach it. You want me to stop? I stood up, laptop tucked under my arm. Then we need to have a very different conversation than the one we started tonight. Gary's face had shifted from pale to green. He knew the penalties for disability fraud. I'd looked them up during his initial application process to make sure he was protected. Up to 5 years in federal prison, fines up to $250,000, and full restitution of fraudulently collected benefits. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want the truth. All of it. How long you've been working, how much you've made, who else knows about it, and why you thought ambushing me on Christmas was the solution to your guilty conscience. Mom reached across the table and grabbed Gary's hand. Tell him everything, please. Gary took a shuddering breath. I've been doing small construction jobs since April. Tom Henderson asked me to help with his deck project, offered to pay cash. I told him I couldn't take money because of disability, but he insisted. Said it wasn't really work, just helping a neighbor. How much did Tom pay you? I asked. $2,000 for the deck work. But Matthew, I really was just helping. How much total? Why? I interrupted. From all the jobs combined. Gary's shoulders sagged. Maybe $25,000 since April. $25,000 in 8 months. While I'd contributed $32,000 to household expenses during the same period. While he collected disability payments of $9,600. So your actual income has been about $4,000 a month, I said. Combined with Mom's $1,600 from Safeway, your household brings in $5,600 monthly. Emma was doing the math too. That's more than our expenses. You guys don't even need Matthew's money anymore. But what if I get hurt again? Gary asked desperately. What if the work dries up? What if you reported your recovery like an honest person and got legitimate work? Sarah's voice cut through his excuses. What if you stopped committing federal crimes and started taking responsibility for your own family? It's not that simple, Mom interjected. Construction work isn't guaranteed. The economy's unstable. Matthew's income was security. Matthew's income was a crutch, Sarah shot back. And instead of being grateful for 3 years of financial rescue, you decided to push him away because accepting help felt uncomfortable. I sat back down, still holding my laptop. Mom, whose idea was the Christmas dinner ambush. Her guilty expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. I suggested, she said quietly, that maybe it was time for you to find your own place. You're almost 30, Matthew. You should be building your own life, not supporting ours. So this was your plan? I asked. Make me feel unwelcome so I'd leave voluntarily. I thought it would be easier than asking you to go directly. Less hurtful. Less hurtful. I laughed bitterly. You thought calling me a burden on Christmas would be less hurtful than an honest conversation about independence. We were afraid you'd cut off the money if we asked nicely, Emma said quietly. The honesty in her admission hit harder than Gary's fraud or Mom's manipulation. They'd been afraid to treat me with respect because they needed my financial support. They'd chosen deception and emotional abuse over honest communication because they couldn't risk losing their funding. My phone rang, interrupting the heavy silence. Jake Morrison's name appeared on the screen, my boss calling on Christmas Eve. I should take this, I said, accepting the call. Jake, what's up? Matthew, sorry to call on Christmas, but I wanted to follow up on that Seattle opportunity. The client is eager to move forward, and they're offering a signing bonus if you can start January 2nd. How much of a signing bonus? I asked, putting the phone on speaker without really thinking about it. $25,000 on top of the salary increase. They really want you leading this project. The number hung in the air. $25,000, exactly what Gary had made in fraudulent cash work offered to me legitimately for doing what I loved. Jake, can I call you back tomorrow? I need to discuss the relocation with my family. Of course. But Matthew, don't wait too long. This is the kind of opportunity that could set you up for VP-level positions down the road. After I hung up, the dining room stayed silent for a long moment. $55,000 signing bonus and salary increase combined, Emma said finally, to move to Seattle and advance your career. While we face federal fraud investigations and financial collapse, Mom added quietly. I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them. Gary caught in a web of lies and federal crimes. Mom, who'd orchestrated my humiliation to ease her own guilt. Emma, who'd known about the plan to push me out but hoped I'd leave quietly. And then there was Sarah's voice from my phone representing the life I could have. The honest relationship, the career advancement, the freedom from this toxic dynamic that had consumed 3 years of my life. You know what the real tragedy is? I said, opening my laptop again. If you'd been honest with me 6 months ago about Dad's recovery, about the cash, work about wanting more independence, I would have worked with you. We could have created a transition plan. I could have helped you budget Dad's legitimate income, helped him report his recovery properly, helped you adjust to financial independence gradually. Instead, I continued navigating back to the fraud reporting website. You chose lies, manipulation, and emotional abuse. You chose to call me a burden rather than thank me for 3 years of sacrifice. So now your choices have consequences. I began typing again, reading aloud. I am reporting suspected disability fraud by Gary Thompson. Based on documented evidence, including social media posts, banking records, and recorded confession, Mr. Thompson has been collecting federal disability benefits while earning approximately $25,000 in unreported construction work. Matthew, please, Gary begged. I'll stop the cash work. I'll report everything to Social Security. I'll pay back what I owe. You'll do all of that anyway, I said, still typing. The question is whether you do it before or after federal investigators show up at our door. I paused, my finger hovering over the submit button. Here's what's going to happen, I said, looking at each of them. You have 30 days to figure out your finances because I'm taking the Seattle job. You have 72 hours to decide whether Dad reports his fraud voluntarily or I submit this report. The power in the room had shifted completely. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one begging for respect or understanding. They needed me now, not my money, but my discretion. And one more thing, I added, closing the laptop without submitting the report. Sarah was right about everything, every single thing. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd spent 3 years feeling like a guest in my own life. Pale winter sunlight filtered through curtains I'd hung in middle school, illuminating a space that perfectly captured my arrested development. Comic book posters from high school shared wall space with my college diplomas and professional certifications. My adult achievements cramped into a teenager's sanctuary. I could hear hushed voices downstairs. Gary and Mom probably calculating their financial doom. Emma's voice occasionally joined the conversation, higher pitched with anxiety. Nobody had come to check on me to apologize or to attempt reconciliation. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Sarah had called 6 times after our conversation ended abruptly last night. Emma had texted repeatedly, "Please don't report Dad, we can fix this, give us a chance." Gary's most recent message, sent at 3:27 a.m., simply said, "I'm sorry." I dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where I found my family clustered around the kitchen table with financial documents spread like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, Social Security paperwork, receipts, and what looked like a hastily scribbled budget covered every available surface. "Morning," I said, grabbing coffee from the pot Mom had made. They looked up guiltily like children caught plotting mischief. "Matthew, we've been working all night," Mom said, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion or tears. "We think we can make this work without your money." "Show me," I said, settling into the chair across from their financial disaster. Emma pushed a legal pad toward me. Her handwriting covered 2 pages of calculations. Dad's disability income, $1,200 monthly. Mom's Safeway salary, $1,600 monthly. If Dad reports his recovery and finds legitimate work, even at minimum wage, that's another $1,200 monthly. Total, $4,000 monthly. Our mandatory expenses, she continued, flipping the page, mortgage, utilities, insurance, food, gas, $4,200 monthly. You're short $200, I observed. But that's without Dad's cash work income, Gary interjected quickly. If I take legitimate construction jobs, report everything properly, I could make $3,000 to $4,000 monthly during busy season. I sipped my coffee studying their amateur financial planning. And during slow season winter months when construction work disappears, their confident expressions faltered. We'd have to adjust, Mom said weakly. Cut expenses, find part-time work. Downsize the house, Emma added. Move somewhere cheaper. The practical reality of financial independence was setting in. For 3 years, my income had shielded them from economic consequences. Without that buffer, every expense required careful consideration. What about Emma's education? I asked. I can take out student loans for spring semester, Emma said, though her voice lacked conviction. Work more hours, maybe delay graduation by a semester. Or transfer to a state school I can actually afford, she amended more honestly. I walked to the window overlooking our backyard where Gary's shed sat, filled with tools purchased during his supposed disability period. New Circular saw professional grade-level pneumatic nail gun equipment for someone planning to work, not someone too injured for construction. Dad, when exactly did you realize you could do physical labor again? Gary joined me at the window. Honestly, about 6 months after the injury, the physical therapy worked better than expected. But I was scared, Matthew. Scared to lose the security of guaranteed income. So you've been capable of supporting your family for over 2 years but chose to let me do it instead. It wasn't that calculated, he protested. At first I genuinely needed help. Then when I started feeling better, your income was already supporting us. It was easier to keep things as they were than to risk changing a system that worked. Worked for who? I turned to face him. Because it wasn't working for me, Dad. I've been carrying financial responsibility for grown adults who were capable of supporting themselves. We know that now, Mom said from the table. We can see how unfair. No, you can't, I interrupted. If you could see how unfair it was, you wouldn't have planned this Christmas ambush. You wouldn't have told me I was a burden. You would have approached me honestly about transitioning to independence. Emma closed her legal pad. Matthew, what can we do to make this right? I rejoined them at this table, pushing aside bank statements to make space for my coffee cup. You can't make 3 years right, I said simply. You can't undo the disrespect, the manipulation, the lies. You can't give me back the relationships I sacrificed, the career opportunities I delayed, or the financial goals I postponed. Their faces fell further with each item on my list. But mister, I continued, you can stop making it worse. Hope flickered in Mom's eyes. Dad, you're going to call Social Security on Tuesday and report your recovery. You're going to disclose every penny of cash income and work out a repayment plan for fraudulent benefits. Gary nodded reluctantly. Mom, you're going to stop manipulating conversations to protect Dad's pride. Emma, you're going to take responsibility for your education costs instead of expecting family subsidies. And if we do all that, Emma asked, then I'll pay basic household bills through January while you adjust to financial reality. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, nothing else. No discretionary spending, no convenience purchases, no safety net beyond keeping you housed and warm. What about after January? Mom asked quietly. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Coffee this morning. We need to talk about our future. After January, I'm moving to Seattle, I said, standing up. I'm taking the promotion, accepting the signing bonus, and building the life I should have started 3 years ago. Matthew, wait, Gary started. No. I held up my hand. This conversation is over. You wanted me to learn independence, I did. I learned that I can't be responsible for adults who won't take responsibility for themselves. I headed toward the stairs, then paused. One more thing. Sarah and I are going to look at apartments today. If you disrespect her or make passive-aggressive comments about her helping me move forward, I'll submit that fraud report tonight instead of giving you time to handle it voluntarily. The threat settled over them like cold air. For the first time in 3 years, they understood that their actions had consequences, and I held the power to enforce those consequences. As I climbed the stairs to call Sarah back, I heard Emma whisper to her parents, "We really screwed this up, didn't we?" Gary's response was barely audible. Yeah, we really did. But it was too little too late. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt with apologies and regret. Some trust once broken can't be restored with promises of change. They'd taught me that family loyalty has limits, that generosity without respect becomes exploitation, that enabling others often disables yourself. Now it was time for all of us to learn what independence actually meant. Sarah arrived 2 hours later, looking stunning despite the early hour and emotional chaos of the previous evening. She wore dark jeans and a cream cable knit sweater that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. When she hugged me in the doorway, she smelled like vanilla and possibility. "How are you holding up?" she asked, studying my face. "Better than expected," I said honestly. "Angry but better. Clearer." She followed me to the living room where my family had strategically retreated to give us privacy. Gary was in the garage, presumably planning his return to legitimate work. Mom was aggressively cleaning the kitchen, her usual stress response. Emma had disappeared upstairs, probably texting friends about her imploding family dynamics. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, settling beside me on the couch. "Something I've been planning for weeks." My stomach dropped. After 24 hours of family revelations, I wasn't sure I could handle more surprises. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" I asked. She smiled and pulled a set of keys from her purse. "That depends on how you feel about early Christmas presents." The keys were attached to a keychain I'd never seen a miniature Space Needle charm. "Sarah, what?" "I rented us an apartment in Seattle," she said quickly before I could process fully. "Two-bedroom downtown, available January 1st. I put down the security deposit 3 weeks ago." I stared at the keys, my brain struggling to catch up. "You rented an apartment in Seattle 3 weeks ago." I could see where this family situation was heading, Matthew. Your generosity was being exploited and they were taking you for granted. I've been watching you sacrifice your own goals for people who didn't appreciate the gift you were giving them. She curled my fingers around the keys. "When you told me about the promotion opportunity, I called my company's Seattle office. Turns out they need a senior marketing director for their Pacific Northwest expansion. The position pays $85,000, starts February 1st. You got a job in Seattle." The surprises kept layering. For us. For you. For me. For the relationship we could have if you weren't constantly managing your family's financial crises. She leaned against my shoulder. "I've been planning our escape, baby. I just didn't know it would happen this dramatically." I held up the keys, studying the tiny Space Needle charm. "What kind of apartment?" "Corner unit, 20th floor. Views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. Modern kitchen, in-unit laundry gym in the building." Her voice grew excited. "It's everything we've talked about wanting. Space for your home office, walking distance to Pike Place Market, that coffee shop culture you love." "How much that's?" The practical part of my brain was calculating costs. $2,800 monthly, but with our combined salaries, that's completely manageable. Plus, you'll have that signing bonus to furnish it however we want. $2,800. Less than I'd been contributing monthly to my family's household expenses. The same amount Gary and Mom earned together before his fraudulent cash work. "Sarah, this is incredible," I said, pulling her closer. "But are you sure you want to make this big a life change, moving across the country for someone whose family just imploded spectacularly?" "Matthew, your family imploding isn't your failure. It's evidence that you've been propping up people who needed to learn how to stand on their own." She turned to face me directly. "I'm not moving for your family. I'm moving for you. For us. For the life we can build together without managing other adults' choices." I thought about the apartment I'd given up 3 years ago, the independence I'd sacrificed, the future I'd postponed. The opportunity Sarah was offering represented everything I'd been working toward, delayed, but not destroyed. "When do we need to decide?" I asked. "The lease starts January 1st regardless. I signed it yesterday morning before your family dinner. I was hoping to surprise you with it tonight, assuming your Christmas conversation went better than it did." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out my timing was perfect, just not in the way I expected." A sound from the kitchen reminded me we weren't alone. Mom was still aggressively organizing cabinets, probably listening to every word of our conversation. "Let's go for a drive," I suggested. I want to see this city we might be leaving. We bundled up against the cold December afternoon and drove through Denver's snow-dusted streets. Sarah pointed out restaurants we'd never tried together, neighborhoods we'd talked about, exploring hiking trails we'd planned to tackle next summer. I'll miss this place, she said as we parked overlooking the city from Lookout Mountain. But I won't miss watching you carry emotional weight that isn't yours to carry. 3 years? I mused, studying Denver's skyline. 3 years of thinking I was being responsible, mature, helpful. Turns out I was just enabling dysfunction. You weren't enabling dysfunction, Matthew. You were responding to a genuine crisis with incredible generosity. The problem was that your family got comfortable in crisis mode instead of working toward resolution. She was right. Gary's injury had been real, their financial need legitimate. But somewhere along the way, temporary assistance had become permanent dependence and gratitude had soured into entitlement. What do you think will happen to them? I asked. They'll figure it out, Sarah said confidently. Adults are amazingly resourceful when they can't rely on someone else to solve their problems. Your dad will find legitimate work, your mom will increase her hours. Emma will learn about student loans and scholarships. They'll be fine. And if they're not, then they'll face the natural consequences of their choices, which is how adults learn to make better choices. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Matthew, you can't protect people from the outcomes of their own decisions forever. Eventually, that protection becomes harm. We drove back through neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where I'd learned to read, the high school where I'd met my first girlfriend, the college campus where I'd earned my engineering degree. My whole life had been building toward independence, that I'd voluntarily surrendered to family obligation. I want to take this Seattle job, I said as we pulled into my driveway. I want to move into our apartment and build something that's ours. Sarah's smile was radiant. Really? Really? But first I need to make sure my family understands this isn't negotiable and it isn't temporary. We walked back into a house that felt different than it had that morning. The financial documents were gone from the kitchen table, replaced by a handwritten note from Gary. Matthew called Social Security. Appointment Tuesday at 9 a.m. to report recovery and income. We'll arrange repayment plan for benefits. Thank you for 30 days transition time. We understand Seattle decision. Dad. Emma appeared from the living room looking older than her 21 years. Mom and Dad want to talk to you, she said quietly. They're in Dad's office. I found my parents sitting across from each other at the desk where Gary used to pay bills before I took over that responsibility. Mom had been crying. Gary looked like he'd aged 5 years and 5 hours. We owe you an apology, Mom said before I could speak. A real apology, not an excuse disguised as sorry. We were wrong, Gary continued. About how we treated you, about what we expected, about calling you a burden when you've been the opposite of a burden for 3 years. We were scared, Mom admitted. Scared of losing the security you provided, scared of facing our real financial situation, scared of admitting we'd become completely dependent on our son's generosity. So we convinced ourselves you were the problem instead of recognizing we'd become the problem, Gary finished. I sat down in the chair I'd occupied during countless family discussions, but this time felt different. This time I wasn't negotiating or explaining or defending my choices. Thank you for saying that, I said simply. It doesn't change my decision, but it helps. We understand about Seattle, Mom said. We understand why you need to go, why you need to build your own life. We should have encouraged that instead of making it impossible. The hardest part, Gary said, his voice rough with emotion, is realizing we turned our son's greatest strength, his willingness to sacrifice for family, into a weakness we could exploit. The honesty of their admission hit harder than their previous anger or desperation. I need you to know, I said, choosing my words carefully, that I don't regret helping when you genuinely needed it. Dad's injury was real, the financial crisis was real, my decision to help was the right decision at the time. They both nodded, tears in their eyes. But I continued, what happened after that, the taking advantage, the lack of gratitude, the manipulation, that was a choice. And choices have consequences. We know, Mom whispered. We know we ruined something that can't be fixed. Maybe it can be fixed, I said, surprising myself. Not the living situation, not the financial relationship, but maybe we can rebuild respect and trust over time. if you're willing to do the work. Hope flickered in their faces. What kind of work? Gary asked. Honest communication. Taking responsibility for your own decisions. Treating me like an adult family member instead of a financial resource. Understanding that love and respect have to exist together. Can you forgive us? Mom asked. I'm working on it, I said honestly. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to change. They both nodded eagerly. Then let's see how the next month goes, I said, standing up. Let's see if you can treat me with respect while I'm helping you transition. Let's see if you can be grateful instead of entitled. Let's see if you can support my decision to build my own life instead of guilting me about it. We will, Gary promised. We'll prove we can do better. Good, I said, moving toward the door. Because Sarah and I are going to start packing my room tonight. I want to spend my last month here preparing for our future instead of managing your financial chaos. As I reached the doorway, I turned back. One more thing. Thank you for forcing this conversation last night. If you hadn't called me a burden, I might have stayed trapped in this dynamic for years. Your cruelty accidentally set me free. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Their attempt to push me away had indeed freed me, just not in the way they'd intended. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of our 20th floor Seattle apartment, watching ferryboats navigate Elliott Bay's gray-blue waters while morning coffee steamed in my hands. The Olympic Mountains rose like sleeping giants beyond the Sound, their snow-covered peaks catching early sunlight in shades of pink and gold. Behind me, Sarah moved through our kitchen making breakfast and humming something tuneless but cheerful. The morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the life we'd built together. Modern furniture we'd chosen as a couple, artwork reflecting our shared tastes, bookshelves combining our separate collections into something new. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad started his legitimate construction business yesterday. First client wants a deck rebuild. Paying proper taxes and everything. Mom got promoted to assistant manager at Safeway. We're doing okay. 3 months of weekly check-ins had chronicled my family's adjustment to financial independence. Gary had reported his recovery to Social Security, arranged a repayment plan for fraudulent benefits, and slowly built a client base for legitimate construction work. The transition had been rocky. Some weeks brought plenty of work. Others left them calculating grocery expenses carefully, but they were surviving without my subsidies. More importantly, they were learning. Mom had stopped her passive-aggressive comments about my relationship with Sarah. Gary no longer criticized my life choices or offered unsolicited advice about career decisions. Emma had transferred to a state school she could afford with student loans and part-time work, discovering she was more resourceful than anyone had realized. Coffee's ready? Sarah called from the kitchen. I joined her at our dining table where she'd set out breakfast alongside the Sunday Seattle Times. Her hair caught the morning light, and she wore the oversized sweater I'd bought her for Valentine's Day. Jake called yesterday afternoon, I said, accepting the coffee mug she offered. The client acquisition project exceeded all targets. They're talking about fast-tracking me to VP level by year-end. That's incredible. Sarah's smile lit up her entire face. You've accomplished more in 3 months here than in 3 years managing your family's crises. She was right. Without the constant stress of financial responsibility for other adults, my work performance had skyrocketed. I arrived at the office energized instead of drained, focused on professional challenges instead of family drama. The promotion opportunity was real and achievable. My manager wants to discuss it over lunch next week, I continued. Vice President of Client Relations, 40,000 salary increase, stock options, company car. We should celebrate Baker, Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Dinner at that restaurant overlooking the water you've been wanting to try. I nodded, but my attention was caught by an email notification on my phone. Gary's name appeared in my inbox, our first direct communication since I'd left Denver in January. Matthew Maylerida, the email began. I wanted you to know that yesterday I paid off the last installment of my Social Security debt. The fraudulent benefits have been completely repaid, and my record is clear with the federal government. I also wanted to share that my construction business earned enough last month to cover all our household expenses without your help. We're officially financially independent. I read the email aloud to Sarah, who listened with the satisfied expression of someone whose predictions had proven accurate. But that's not really why I'm writing. Gary's email continued. I'm writing to thank you, not just for 3 years of financial support, but for forcing us to grow up. Your decision to leave to prioritize your own life taught us lessons we couldn't have learned any other way. We learned that gratitude requires practice, that respect can't be demanded, only earned, that family love means supporting each other's growth, not exploiting each other's generosity. Emma is thriving at her new school, working part-time and managing her own budget. Your mother has gained confidence from her promotion and takes pride in contributing significantly to our household income. I've discovered that earning my own money feels better than accepting yours, even when the amounts are smaller. Most importantly, we learned that enabling our dependence wasn't kindness, it was preventing us from discovering our own strength. I know I can't undo the disrespect, the manipulation, or the Christmas dinner ambush that started this whole crisis, but I can tell you that losing your financial support was the best thing that ever happened to this family. We had to learn how to be adults again, how to solve our own problems, how to appreciate what we had instead of expecting what we wanted. I hope someday you'll visit us in Colorado, not as our financial lifeline, but as our son who built an incredible life for himself. We'd love to meet the man you've become when you're not carrying the weight of our poor decisions. Thank you for loving us enough to let us face the consequences of our choices. Thank you for refusing to enable our dysfunction any longer. Thank you for teaching us that independence is a gift we give ourselves. Love and respect in that order this time, Dad. I set down my phone, surprised by the emotional impact of Gary's words. Not guilt or regret, but something closer to peace. The validation that my decision had been correct, that walking away had benefited everyone involved. How does that make you feel? Sarah asked gently. Proud, I said, considering my emotions carefully. Proud that they figured it out. Proud that I had the strength to enforce boundaries. Proud that we can have a relationship based on respect instead of financial obligation. Are you going to visit them? Maybe this summer, I said, when I can go as their successful son instead of their emergency fund. Sarah smiled and returned to the Sunday paper, but I remained lost in thought. The view from our balcony stretched across Puget Sound toward mountains and possibilities I couldn't have imagined from my childhood bedroom in Denver. My phone rang, Emma calling for our weekly check-in. Matthew, did you get Dad's email? Just read it, I said, answering on speaker so Sarah could participate. He's been working on that message for weeks, Emma said, her voice bubbling with excitement. Rewriting it over and over, trying to find the right words to express what he's learned. How are you doing, Em? Really? Better than ever, she said honestly. I love my new school. I love having a job and managing my own money. I love feeling capable instead of dependent. It's scary sometimes, but scary in a good way, like I'm actually growing up. And Mom and Dad, they're like different people, Matthew. They communicate better, they appreciate each other more, they've stopped taking things for granted. Losing your subsidies forced them to become partners in solving problems instead of just complaining about problems. I could hear the maturity in Emma's voice, the confidence that comes from facing challenges successfully. There's something else, she continued. I'm getting married next spring. Emma, Sarah squealed, grabbing the phone. To who? And tell us everything. His name is David Chen. He's in my economics program. We've been dating since I transferred schools. He's kind, smart, hardworking, everything I want in a partner. Emma's happiness was infectious even through the phone. And the best part, she continued, is that we're planning and paying for the wedding ourselves. No family financial drama, no guilt about expenses, just two adults making adult decisions about their future. I'm so happy for you, I said, meaning every word. Will you walk me down the aisle? Emma asked quietly. I know I have Dad, but you're the one who taught me about real strength, about making hard decisions to protect the people you love. The request caught me off guard. Of course. I'd be honored. After we ended the call, Sarah and I sat in comfortable silence, processing the transformation of my family relationships. From financial obligation to genuine affection. From enablement to respect. From dysfunction to health. You know what I've realized? I said, reaching for Sarah's hand. What's that, Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to protect them from their own choices. My family needed to experience natural consequences to develop real strength. And you needed to experience your own independence to discover what you're truly capable of, Sarah added. Look what you've accomplished in just 3 months when your energy wasn't being drained by other people's drama. She was right. Professional success, relationship growth, personal peace, all the things that had felt impossible while I was managing my family's financial chaos had become achievable once I focused on my own life. I used to think family meant sacrificing your own goals to support other people's comfort, I continued. Now I understand that healthy family means encouraging each other's growth, even when that growth means moving away or setting boundaries. Real love celebrates independence, not dependence, Sarah agreed. Exactly. My parents love me more now that they respect me. Emma and I have a better relationship now that she doesn't need my money. Everyone is healthier because I stopped enabling dysfunction. I stood up and walked back to the balcony, looking out over the water toward the mountains where our hiking boots waited for weekend adventures. Behind me, Sarah loaded our breakfast dishes into the dishwasher we'd chosen together in the kitchen we'd designed together in the apartment we'd furnished with money we'd earned together. I learned something else, I called to her. What's that? She asked, joining me on the balcony. I learned that you can't build a healthy future on a foundation of unhealthy obligation. I had to step away from my family's dysfunction before I could create something better. And now we get to build whatever we want, together. Sarah leaned against me, her warmth cutting through the cool Seattle morning. What do we want to build? I thought about the VP position waiting for me, about Emma's spring wedding, about the life we were creating one decision at a time. Something honest, I said. Something based on respect instead of need. Something that grows stronger instead of more dependent over time. I love that, Sarah said. As we stood together watching ferries cross the Sound, I realized this was what healthy love looked like. Two independent people choosing to build something together, not because they needed each other to survive, but because they wanted to create something better than either could achieve alone. My phone buzzed with one final text from Gary. Proud of the man you've become. Proud of the life you've built. Thank you for teaching us that real strength sometimes means walking away. I showed the message to Sarah, who smiled and deleted it from my phone. Why did you do that? I asked. Because you don't need to keep reading validation for decisions you know were right, she said simply. You've moved forward. You've built something beautiful. You don't need to keep looking backward for approval. She was absolutely right, again. The story wasn't about my family learning to respect me. It was about me learning to respect myself enough to demand respect from others. It wasn't about them becoming financially independent. It was about me becoming emotionally independent. And the ending wasn't about reconciliation, or forgiveness, or family healing. The ending was about understanding that love without respect is manipulation. That generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. And that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose your own happiness over other people's comfort. I'd spent 3 years thinking I was being noble by sacrificing my goals for my family's needs. Instead, I'd been preventing all of us from growing into the people we were capable of becoming. True family doesn't ask you to choose between loving them and loving yourself. True family celebrates your success, encourages your independence, and supports your growth, even when that growth means moving across the country to build a better life. My family had to lose my financial support to discover their own strength. I had to lose my role as their rescuer to discover my own worth. And Sarah, brilliant, patient, insightful Sarah, had seen the truth long before I was ready to accept it. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to recognize that what feels like love has actually become harm. The mountains across Puget Sound caught the afternoon light, painting snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in Denver, my family was learning to stand on their own feet. Somewhere in the distance, Emma was planning a wedding she could afford. Somewhere in my future, a VP position waited for someone who'd learned that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And here in our apartment above Elliott Bay, Sarah and I were building something real. Something based on choice instead of obligation, growth instead of stagnation, mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their weakness any longer. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do. Sometimes the family that truly loves you is the one that celebrates your courage to leave when leaving is what you need to grow. What about you? Have you ever found yourself sacrificing your own goals to support someone else's comfort? How do you know when helping becomes enabling? When does love require saying no instead of yes? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear about the power of setting healthy boundaries. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult decisions and building authentic relationships. Thank you for taking this journey with me. May you find the courage to choose growth over comfort, respect over convenience, and your own authentic path over other people's expectations. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is love yourself enough to demand better. Until next time, remember, real family supports your flight, not clips your wings.